King Radio Network at ParanormalKing.com.
Welcome to the Paranormal News Insider for the week of December 18th, 2018. And this is officially episode number 380. And this is your host, Dr. Brian D. Parsons. And we are live here right on the Paranormal King Radio Network at ParanormalKing.com. And talking with the producer off the air before the show. And yeah, this is it. I can't believe it. 2018 is already over. I don't know. I guess it's 2 more weeks for you guys, but for me, as far as the Paranormal News Insider is concerned, this is it. We are done. This is the really and truly only the 36th show I've done this year. That may sound like a lot to some people, but really not a whole lot because you have 52 weeks in a year. Granted, next week is a Christmas. So I'm not going to be doing a show on Christmas. I'll be tired from helping Santa deliver all these presents and everything. No, not really. Just it's a holiday. You got to take it off. And had some other things happen during the year that we'll talk about as we get into the top 10 paranormal news stories of 2018. And I'll also be taking the first week off of 2019. So not only will I not see you until next year, it's going to be all the way up until January 8th until I talk to you guys again because, yeah, it's another holiday, New Year's Day. Everything's always a week after each other and just kind of timed out that way. I know in years past I've done shows, but nobody shows up. So it's only 2 weeks. It's not 3 weeks, Dita. It's only 2 weeks. It'll go by fast. I got a lot to do though. I got to catch up on Christmas stuff, which I'm running out of time, and some other stuff that will be coming up in January. Which January I'll miss another week, a couple of weeks after I come back. No big deal. And then it's full steam ahead until March, which then I take another vacation. But we'll cross that bridge when we get there. So tonight we have a very packed show. And we've got a lot of stuff to cover, a couple of years worth of information. And tonight I'm going to do everything a little bit different. A little bit of a different format for you tonight as we're going to cover a few new stories sprinkled in. But it's going to be sprinkled in as we talk about last year's news as well as this year's news. But we will cover the top 10 of last year and of this year, and we will reveal the number 3, number 2, and the number 1 story of 2018 of the top 10 paranormal news stories of 2018. And I can't believe it's over. It just seems like September was here a couple of weeks ago, and then all of a sudden here it is at the end of December. We're past the midway point of December at least. Christmas is next week. Man, it's just weird. Stores will be setting Valentine's Day already pretty much a week from tomorrow. You're going to see Valentine's Day out. I don't think I'm ready for that. I'm really not ready for that. But anyway, let's get back to the show tonight. And first off, I want to give another shout out this past Sunday night. If you were there, I know Dita was there in the crowd. Ross was also there, my producer, King. Was on a podcast, Nightmare 365. Good show, a new show. I hadn't really heard about it, going to be honest. I was asked to come on the show and talk a little bit with these guys and did a little research, looked them up on YouTube. I always want to make sure that a show is going to be a good fit for me to be on it because of the way I am. A little skeptical. Yes, I'm a little skeptical. And my audience is a lot smaller than what it could be. I could have pretty huge ratings if I were to pretty much say everything is true and all these UFO stories are legitimate and conspiracy theories are true and all, this and that. And that. But that's not me. I'm trying to be honest as a person, as a researcher, as an investigator. All my work and my efforts, everything. I'm trying to be true to you, the listener. I'm giving you the reality as I know it or as I perceive it. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. But it's just how I feel about these things. And yes, I'd rather have the truth. That's been my whole thing my entire life. That's why I got into this, because I always need to know the truth. What is going on behind anything? I don't care what it is. Anything I do, whether it was learning how to kayak or playing baseball or anything, I always want to know the truth. I dig into things and find the reality. You know, the guys that put the weights on their bats before they bat, it's actually the wrong thing to do. Science says so. You shouldn't do that. It actually slows your bat speed. Weird things like that. The useless trivia. I am the king of useless trivia. I know way too much that really doesn't matter to anybody or anything, but I like to know the truth at the bottom of that. So that being said, I like to make sure if I'm going to go on a program, another radio program, or even show up at a conference convention, that I'm going to be a good fit, that I'm not going to alienate myself or my audience is not the crowd that I want to speak to. But then I noticed these guys were, they seem fairly new to the paranormal, but they know what they're talking about. They've done a lot of good research, and they're bringing things up that was great to me, because a lot of times these stories come and go. People forget all about them, but they're digging stuff up from a couple of years ago, and I was all excited to see that. Wow, I haven't heard that in a while, and really great stuff that they've been doing. So, on the other end too, not only am I a good fit, but are they a good fit for me? And just listening to these guys talk before I went on the show, I felt like this was going to be a really good time. And it was. It was a fantastic time hanging out with Matt and Greg on the Nightmare 365 podcast. So if you have time, well, I don't care. No, you're going to make time. Head on over to their YouTube channel. Head on over to their website at nightmare365.com and check these guys out. They've got their heads screwed on straight, and they see things pretty similarly to how I interpret things. There's always going to be things that nobody agrees on. There's some things they believe in that maybe I don't. Maybe it's vice versa with some stuff, but still, these guys are great, and they're going to be around a long time. And they're going to have some great things going on in their show in the future, I guarantee you. And I hope to be back on that show as well. So subscribe to the YouTube channel. Follow them on social media. Great guys, great content. And I like their formats, how they do different types of programs, which is, I might have to steal that. Well, I kind of did that before. I used to have the Paranormal News Insider, the 1 hour show, and then I did a short segment, which is exactly kind of what they do, which is, I think, is awesome. I think it's the way to go. I just don't have time to do that as much. But anyway, check those guys out, Matt and Greg, on Nightmare365.com and the Nightmare 365 podcast. Great guys, great show. I had a lot of fun. I did, and I usually enjoy my radio appearances because I get to be on the other side of the mic. It's not like I'm just reading news or talking about things on my end. I've done the other format where I've interviewed people. I've interviewed a lot of people. I can't even tell you, probably 10, 15, 20 people on 3 different shows that I used to be on as a co-host or fill-in host every now and again. But I like doing what I do, and everybody has their own format. But I like what they're doing. Good stuff. And yeah, like tonight, like I said, we're going to be bouncing a little bit all over the place, a little bit, but we're going to be sticking to basically the year that was, 2018. And we'll also mentioned 2017 for last year. I mean, what better way to segue into the news of this year than to talk about what happened last year? Because I was looking at it a few weeks ago when I started getting this countdown put together, and I was like, man, I forgot all about that. A lot of interesting stuff happened last year. And I tell you, I'm really excited about next year. Kind of holding off on doing events. A lot of people have been asking me, am I doing my convention next year, the Twinsburg Paranormal Convention? And I can tell you, no, I'm not. I won't have the time. I got a lot of stuff going on in January, going on a cruise in March, and hopefully some other stuff. I may be hopefully moving next year sometime. So that's kind of setting aside a little bit of time, but I'll be having a couple of appearances in May. And of course, my favorite one, the PA Bigfoot Camping Adventure. Can't wait for that one at the end of May, May 31st through June 2nd. And you're going to get tired of hearing about that, but it's going to be a lot of fun. If you haven't got your tickets for that, you better get them now. And get a camping spot as well, because you're going to need that. So check that out, PABigfootCampingAdventure.com. It's going to be tons of fun, and it's going to be intense, because we're going to be intense. Get it? Got it? All right, good. That's right. It is intense. Now, I wish I could move out of Ohio. Personally, if I had my choice, I'd love to move to Washington State, but probably not going to happen. I'll be content moving down the road if I could. I've outlived my welcome where I'm at right now. Anyway, enough about me. Enough about next year. Let's wrap up this year. What do you say? So, one story I do want to talk about that just came out, and I love talking about this because it's interesting to kind of not really compare myself, but also compare and contrast, and to look at what other people think of what some of the top stories of the year are. And Lauren Coleman does a fantastic breakdown every year. He covers the top cryptid books, which I mentioned here a couple of weeks ago. Also unveils the cryptozoologist of the year as well, which I talked about. That was back in September when they had the conference up there in Portland, Maine, at the International Cryptozoology Museum. And if you don't know who Lauren Coleman is, goodness, look him up. I mean, he's got some of the best books on cryptozoology that you'll ever read, next to mine, of course, the Handbook for the Amateur Cryptozoologist. But he's been around a long time, and he's essentially a living legend. He's accomplished a lot in his time, and is still accomplishing more. And very, very big guy to look up to here in the United States. So anyway, he does his top cryptozoology stories of 2018. And whenever I see this, I always kind of look and compare to what I've put on my list. And of course, my list is not just cryptozoology. It's also UFO stories. It's also potential ghost stories or scientific breakthroughs or strange Earth things. And I've also kind of put some other mysterious things on there every once in a while, but whatever's weird, whatever's not normal. I don't want to say paranormal, but it's kind of stretched the definition of paranormal a little bit, but still kind of keeping in that context of strange. And on Lauren's list of top cryptozoology stories of 2018, sadly, here at the top is cryptozoologists' deaths. So people that we've lost through the year. John Bindernagel comes to mind. He was one of the first, unfortunately, this year in January, who passed away. Sandra Mancy, Al Hodgson, Bill Dragonis. For starters, there's others as well, but it's you think about it. Cryptozoology was huge. Pretty much 60s and 1970s was the big decade for Bigfoot. So, time catches up with all of us. That was 40 years ago. And, time is moving. And so, unfortunately, a lot of our older cryptozoologists, the guys that kind of kicked things off and have carried that torch for the last 40, 50 years, sadly, are starting to pass away, and it's kind of hard, when you see that leadership and those that started it off for us, sadly moving on. That it makes it hard, but hopefully there will be a lot of people to fill in those shoes and help move this field forward. Number 2 on his list is Alaskan Bigfoot and Thunderbird sightings. I don't remember if I mentioned this. I remember this happening. This is way back. It started in January. There was a tsunami alert, and a couple of families saw what they thought was a Bigfoot-like creature heading up the hill to higher ground. Somehow, some way, they knew there was a potential for tsunami. There was no tsunami that happened though, so I don't know what that would mean or how that would work. But they also said multiple tracks were found as well. Then on February 2nd, there were Thunderbird reports. So not a Ford Thunderbird driving around. Thunderbird, large bird in the sky. And I remember that one distinctly. Large bird with a wingspan about the width of a road. And it's weird because it's Mendenhall Loop Road, and it's right near the Mendenhall Glacier, which I was just at. Well, I guess it's been 2 years now, but I've been to that area, so it was kind of cool to hear about a story in the area that I was just at on vacation. But yeah, Alaska and Thunderbird reports, kind of cool. So the number 3 story, unusual colored animals. And these I remember as well. I don't remember this last one. And you may remember earlier this year, I didn't talk about it here on the show, but there was a cardinal that was photographed that was yellow cardinal. It's pretty nice looking. It's pretty cool. I've seen hundreds, probably thousands of regular red cardinals in my time, but never a yellow one. That would be awful cool. Also was very recently a mountain lion that was a white mountain lion. Does not look like it's melanistic. It's just looks like it's very just white. Apparently, somebody had said it was taken this year, February of 2018. It's not correct. It was determined, I believe, back in 2013 in a camera trap in Brazil of a white puma in a national park. Really interesting. And then in December of this year, obviously, a white reindeer from Norway went viral. I don't remember that, but I'll take his word for it. And number 4, Bigfoot stomps on a mattress. And I remember this story, and I wasn't sure how to take this. It was basically just kind of a tweet that people picked up on and ran with this. Just basically a case that was going on. Let's see, Bigfoot did not make my list this year, I don't think. Well, it could be in the top 3, so maybe I shouldn't say that. Not really a ton of Bigfoot stories this year, at least nothing that was taking a bunch of stories like years past that kind of all combined together into one big story. There's a couple more that he does mention in his list. There was the child pornography guy that moonlit as a Bigfooter. That didn't make my list. Some other weird Bigfoot stories. But there's really no sightings that really took off. But this mattress story, Cliff Barrickman of Finding Bigfoot had a case, and again, pretty much it was just kind of a tweet that went viral, and people were watching this investigation. So there's this mattress on the side of the road, and somebody had seen a Bigfoot go through the area, and on this mattress is a footprint, dirty footprint, not from a baby or somebody that was sleeping on this mattress or anything like that. But he looks like Bigfoot stepped on this mattress. And this is you really think about it, of all the tracks and everything, like I said, back in the 60s and 70s, you can go back into the 50s when Bigfoot tracks were first found, 1952. And you think about all these tracks, everything always found in riverbeds or in dirt and everything else. Never before has anyone ever reported anything like this on cloth or anything. So probably one of the best guys that you can get a hold of, Cliff Barrickman, living out there out west. It was found out west on the side of the road. It was just garbage. And luckily, he secured that and was able to investigate it. Really haven't heard anything since it was found earlier this year, but it was a 13-inch long by 5.5-inch wide impression in the fabric in mud. That's pretty cool. Like I said, this is the first time that I've ever heard of anything like that. So that was really interesting. Number 5 was also a story that was on my list but did not crack the top 10. It was the end of Finding Bigfoot. So again, yes, Cliff Barrickman, Matt Moneymaker, James Bobo Fay, Renee Holland. You see Matt Moneymaker? Yeah, I think I did. So all those guys and gal on that show, 100 episodes, and they didn't find it. Well, they said that they found them. They found some squatches out there, but nothing that convinced the viewers, and it was kind of a sad moment. I mean, it was one of the longest running cryptid shows that I know of, and sad to see something like that disappear. But everything must come to an end. Number 6 on his list was Loch Ness Monster and Ogopogo sightings, and it doesn't really mention too many of these, but Loch Ness Monster was on my list as well. That was back on number 6. It's a number 6 story, and I did not make my list of the. Well, I was hoping that the Ogopogo stories. There was 3 sightings that occurred all in 1 month, and originally it was teetering. It was on the list, but I bumped it out, unfortunately. And I was excited because you don't get to hear anything about Lake Okanagan and the Ogopogo very often. It doesn't really come up too much in the paranormal news. So I was really excited about that, but unfortunately it got bumped out of my list, but it did make Lauren Coleman's list. And I believe I had 5 or 6 stories of the Loch Ness Monster. And today, was it today or was it yesterday? Well, yes, today. So today, a new story of the Loch Ness Monster. A picture has shown up. A gentleman who saw this last week, a man named Ricky Phillips, a 39-year-old, basically he's kind of a tour operator. Last Thursday, was able to snap a photograph of this creature, and it looks really weird, and I will share that in the chat room. A lot of different things here, but this is definitely one that I'm going to share with you guys, because this is, I don't know, I'm not sure. I kind of did some stuff to this in a little bit of time I had, and I don't know what it is. I don't know. Let me link that in there. And somebody asked if there's any ghost stories left in 2018. Well, there was one, but are there any stories remaining? Well, you're going to have to wait. There's only 3 stories left. I don't want to give it away. I don't want to say yes, and I don't want to say no, because that would ruin the top 3. You're going to have to wait. It's called teaser. No, not teaser. What do they call that? Maybe it is teaser. I don't know. They do that out to you all the time in the news. They'll show you a clip, and it's like a story that you really want to see, and they hold on to it to the very end. So there in the chat room, if you're listening into the chat room, you can also get a glimpse of some of these stories. I'll put links in there, and I'll also put photographs in that chat room. But I get it if you can't show up in the chat room. I fully understand that. So what I'll do for you is during the week after the show, starting tomorrow, I'll put links to these stories, and you can go and see the stuff for yourself. And hopefully, since I have, cliffhanger, that's probably a good one. Since I have some time off next week, I'm going to try to get the top 10 of 2018 put together as a blog so you can read about it. You don't have to listen to me talk about it for however long it takes me. You can read it at your own leisure, and hopefully I'll have that out for you. I don't know, sometime next week. We'll see. No promises. But anyway, back to this top 10. So yeah, I don't remember the Loch Ness Monster story coming out this late in the year, but Ricky Phillips, 39 years old, took a picture, and I don't know what to make of this thing. It looks really, really weird. kind of looks like a dinosaur head. It really does. I can't remember the name of the dinosaur I'm thinking of. But it doesn't have the body of that. It just, I don't know what that is. I tried lightening it up and doing different things. It just doesn't make any sense. I don't know what it is, but he said it was a gray creature, almost bird-like, in a gray stretch of water. He said its neck was 3 to 4 feet long, a head the size of a rugby ball, and a ridge across its eyes. He was baffled. Of course, everyone's always baffled when they can't figure things out. He said he heard some noises, metallic-sounding noises, a week prior to that, and they compared it to like hearing Darth Vader, something blowing air like Darth Vader. He says he's swum and sailed with whales and dolphins, seen hundreds of seals, and it sounded like nothing I've ever heard. Then he says, I spun around and saw something gray, just a side of a body and a flipper. So he'd seen it once before. And now this Thursday, he had a tour party, went on their cruise. He decided to walk along the river, and I heard the noise again. So he says, I looked up from the phone and saw a long, straight neck, all completely gray, and a narrow face, which is only about 20 feet away. And then it turned and disappeared all in a few seconds. I looked down and realized that it was in my picture, so I zoomed in, and there it was. It actually looks like a giant bird or a peacock in the face with high ridges above its eyes and what almost looks like a beak. I don't know. He goes on to say, I know dinosaurs came from birds and that many had hard lips, almost like a beak, but this is simply what I saw. It seems to have almost a frill on its neck. It's very odd. All I will say is that if I was going to fake an Nessie, I certainly would have made it look less like a bird and more like what we think Nessie looks like. And end quote on that. So probably strangest Loch Ness Monster sighting, and we'll talk a little bit more about the Loch Ness Monster sightings as we hit number 6 for 2018 on the recap. But definitely a strange one. It does cap it off. Now, does that force this story any higher? I don't think so. So this was underneath the marrying a ghost, so a combination of ghost-like stories where people married or wanted to marry or had relations with ghosts. I don't know, because there was a pretty viral stories. The Loch Ness Monster really wasn't that viral this year. It's just really the combination, the trail of these stories together. So I'm not going to move the order of those stories at all, and we shall see. I don't know. Could have been a tree in the water. Looks like that could be maybe a small root ball there coming out of the water. I've seen a lot of trees in lakes and reservoirs that I've kayaked in. So I don't know. I'm not sold one way or the other on that one. But nice to have a new Loch Ness Monster story this week. And for Lauren Coleman, that's his number 6 story of 2018. Number 7, a few sea serpents, maybe whale penises. So this story, I kind of sidestepped this due to its kind of semi-graphic nature, just kind of ridiculous thing. But Lauren Coleman kind of made the assertion that some of these sea serpents that are described may be misinterpretations of whales kind of displaying themselves, which they do on occasion. And no, I don't have a picture for that data, but you can go online and look. Yeah, they're not really what you'd expect to see sticking out of the ocean water. So if you see it, it's going to look a little weird, and could be an explanation. I don't know. It's kind of a weird story, but it's there. Number 8 was new species and Lazarus discoveries. So Lazarus events, essentially when a species is thought to be extinct or declared extinct, and all of a sudden it's rediscovered, basically referred to as a Lazarus event or a Lazarus taxon. So this happens all the time. There was a finding, I think it was yesterday, reported of a frog that's been missing for 10 years. But that's not really that long. You could look at some of these animals have been gone for hundreds of years, thousands of years, maybe even millions of years. But a leopard was officially declared extinct 25 years ago. And then a new one was seen on a trail camera in June of this year. And the story that I covered as well, that was a story that I was hoping would crack the top 10, because this is about discovery. And to me, a story in my top 10 that is viral is one thing, but if somebody discovers something, I think that has much more weight to it, because it actually adds to our field. But unfortunately, it wasn't that viral of a story, and people weren't really talking about it. And the Wandiwoy tree kangaroo was rediscovered. There was only one specimen known back in 1928. It was a female that was shot, and that's all they had to go on. So this is in a remote area of New Guinea, up in a mountain area, and this guy was looking for plants. He was looking for rhododendrons. He's not really looking for tree kangaroos, but he had heard about these. He was in the area last year and had heard about these tree kangaroos. And then this year, when he was looking for his rhododendrons, he saw tree scrapes, and he had an idea that this could be that tree kangaroo that had gone, thought to be extinct, possibly extinct, and he rediscovered it with some photographs. So pretty cool. Number 9 on Lauren Coleman's top cryptozoology stories of 2018 was the Virginia congressional race becomes involved with Bigfoot erotica. And this was another one that didn't quite make the cut for me. But if you remember, this was a kind of a political story. Not too many people in the paranormal were really talking about this. To me, it was just kind of one of those shake my head kind of moments. But it started, Republican Denver Riggleman was basically accused by somebody who was running against him, Leslie Cockburn. And this went viral. It was a tweet made with a picture of Bigfoot with a little censored box on it, and accused him of being into Bigfoot erotica. And that just erupted online. It was pretty much kind of embarrassing story. I didn't even talk about that, but I thought since it had broke, well, I did mention it when it came out, but I didn't. I'm sorry, it's not Cockburn, it's Coburn. I always pronounce that wrong. Coburn. And yeah, it was just an embarrassing story. So I just kind of let it go. Even though it stayed in the media for a little while, I just let it go. Number 10, crypto tourism highlighted by media. There was an article in the Irish Examiner, The Curious Rise of Crypto Tourism, the search of animals that don't exist. Kind of really talking about how there's a lot of museums popping up. There's a lot of people that are interested in this. Loch Ness obviously leads the way in, I would think, crypto tourism. And Lauren Coleman himself, obviously, is pushing the International Cryptozoology Museum, which is located in Portland, Maine. So when it thaws out a little bit and you head out down east in the spring and you want to go on vacation, maybe for the summer, and if you're going towards Maine, I know there's a lot of great-looking lighthouses up there, some that you've seen 100 times in photographs, but you want to stop in Portland, check out the International Cryptozoology Museum. And Lauren does a lot of other stuff. Put the link in the chat room. And again, if you're not in the chat room, I'll put this link out. Probably be my first link tomorrow, and it has links to the International Cryptozoology Conference for next year, as well as other lists for the Cryptozoologist of the Year this year, Anna Nakaris, PhD, the top 12 best cryptozoology books of 2018, which I covered, and the top cryptozoology obituaries of 2018. So all that news and information right there. and slap that in the chat room for you guys and gals, peoples. And so that's Lauren's stuff. Again, I like to compare and contrast what how he feels about stuff, and obviously a lot of that stuff in his stuff kind of appealed to his kind of background, which I totally get that. I understand it. There's nothing wrong with that. Yeah, so that's that. So before we get into the top 10 of this year, I kind of want to briefly go through the top 10 of 2017. And there I'll also debut another story that that came out. Well, it came out, I think it was yesterday. Was that yesterday? Yeah, it was yesterday. But you might not have heard about this. I think it's pretty cool. But anyway, so last year's list, and I've been trying to do this every year. So, I started this show 10 years ago, 2008. I was a guest on a show, The Grand Dark Conspiracy, the first guest on this podcast. And being the first guest, I wanted to make sure that this show did not fail. So I did my best. I gave the host, Daniel Bouts, gave him some names of people, some contact information, went on his website, was on his message board, and trying to involve myself with that and help him out a little bit. And I was brought back on the show, and during the 2-hour interview, we talked about doing a news segment. He said, hey, if you want to do it, I'll give you full autonomy, whatever you want to do, however long you want. And that's when the show started. The Paranormal News Insider was my idea, his as well, to allow me that time to do what I wanted to do. And it started out as a short segment. I try to keep it about 5 to 10 minutes and basically summarizing the month. So we started out as a monthly show. So I pre-recorded a very short, concise view of the news of the month. And I can't even imagine doing that now. There's so much stuff that goes on. So we did that for 2 years. And in late August, I believe it was, of 2010, Dan decided to go to a weekly format. And I was a little nervous. I didn't think I could do it, but we did it. And went to a weekly format. I did, I think, every single week that year, 52 weeks straight, back in 2011, the first full year of that show, and been doing it since, and we've kind of hopped around a little bit. But 2008 and 9, I didn't do any sort of countdown. I did kind of talk about some of the bigger stories. Obviously, 2008, I'd started in September, so there wasn't a whole lot to report on, but every year I've kind of culminated that. And what ended up happening was to wrap up the year, I was on the Grand Dark Conspiracy talking about the top stories. So I opted to do a top 10 countdown for the listeners. And ultimately, a lot of these, but not all of these, are available if you click on the blog area of the paranewsinsider.com website. But long story short, yeah, too late, right? We'll talk about last year's stuff. If you tuned in last week, we did talk about some of the historical top 10s and top 3s, I guess, going back all the way to 2008. And one of the big stories in years past was the Aflocalypse. And essentially, the Aflocalypse was when, back in 2012, it was the number 5 story, and then the number 2 story was the number 2 story in 2011, and it's just been gone all the way up until 2017, when the Aflocalypse gets a partial explanation. So the Aflocalypse essentially is, and you can look at this, 2010, 2011. It's actually on Wikipedia. There was mass animal die-off stories that usually by themselves are no big deal. They happen all the time. There's been quite a few already this year, but no one has tied them together. But it became a kind of a story of itself. All these things coming out all at the same time. People were kind of panicking about it. Was this the end of the world? Was this end times where animals going to go extinct right before our eyes, right here in the wintertime? But, again, these are logical things that happen all the time. Animals die off. And it's just normal to have, a couple hundred birds here and there, a couple hundred fish there die. It's just normal stuff. Unfortunately, that's what happens. But last February, there was a study into solar storms that determined to be a potential, very high potential cause of mass beaching of cetacean animals. So this could have been, these solar storms could have caused a lot of these ocean-going animals. And you wonder if it also has a correlation with these birds as well that are dying. So really figured that story actually explaining something in the paranormal, to me, was a big deal. It's a pretty big deal. Number 9 was Bigfoot stories as a collection. As I mentioned, Bigfoot didn't make it this year. He didn't make it. Numerous stories, and it's funny because last year, a lot of these stories, there was one side of the story one week, and then the next week there was another side of the story. And it started in January when we had a story of this gentleman who, Christopher Bauer, who said he was contacted about a Bigfoot sighting. A person saw a Bigfoot through a window, and he showed up. He's a tracker. He's been a hunter his whole life. So he knows the outdoors, he knows how to read tracks and all these other things. He said he followed these Bigfoot prints for 7 miles. His tracks were 18 inches long by 8 inches wide in January. So it was snowing, and this was in North Dakota. So they get a little bit of snow in North Dakota in January, I guess. Sometimes, yeah, I'm sure they do. So he went in tracking this thing for about 7 miles. Pretty cool. But, well, that sounds awesome. The following week, it was revealed that somebody had hoaxed those tracks. So a gentleman contacted a newspaper, a television station, WDAY, and said that he had screwed wooden feet to an old pair of shoes, and he walked around this farm, feeling that traffic was there. And he said he crossed the road knowing that traffic would erase any kind of hint of these tracks. So he's not sure how this person, he thinks that this Christopher Bauer is basically making things up, that he couldn't have followed these tracks for 7 miles because he didn't walk that far. And the person that made the tracks admitted that he was drunk at the time. So I don't know. But Bauer then stated, he came back and replied to this and said that the tracks could not have been faked with a 4-foot stride for over 7 miles, especially for somebody who was admittedly drunk. So who knows? It was weird because the story in and of itself in the beginning was really, really interesting. And then it was kind of like shocked, like, oh, wow, somebody actually came out and said that they faked it. Usually they don't. But now, like, you don't know who to believe in that story. And then you had probably my favorite story was the guys, Bigfoot 911 out of North Carolina. They were out of the woods investigating, and they said they saw this Bigfoot in the moonlight. They turned their headlamps on and saw this bipedal animal covered in hair. And my favorite, probably my favorite quote of all time is when this gentleman is describing what he saw. He says, its face was solid black with no hair on it. The hair looked shaggy all over its body. It turned and took 5 steps and was at the bottom of the hill, probably 30 yards. I could see the gluteus maximus flexing with each step, unquote. So they tried to find this thing, but they couldn't find any more signs of it, and they finally gave up. But later on in the night, they had rocks being thrown at them, so they thought it was that creature. But there's 2 sides to every story. So another couple of days later, I think about a week later, a gentleman in Minnesota came out and said he was on vacation down there in North Carolina, and he's into some weird stuff, and he likes to connect with Enkidu, a central figure in the ancient Mesopotamian epic of Gilgamesh. Yeah, he dresses up in order to get connected with nature. He dresses up basically as a Sasquatch. So he says that was him in the woods with these guys. He was afraid, didn't know what was going on, so he tried to get away as fast as he could. So they were basically watching this guy run away, describing his gluteus maximus flexing. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of other stories here as well. This is kind of when the Todd Standing incidents started to build up, which is, again, the number 10 story of this year. There's also Peter Kane, whose YouTube channel tries to convince people that he has Bigfoot parts and he's got evidence of Bigfoot. He doesn't. He's just trying to get attention. And then in number 8, which probably should have been a bigger story last year, the eclipse. Remember the eclipse? Yeah, I was there. I drove down to see that in person, and it was remarkable. It was worth the drive there, and then to turn around to the freeway and drive home. It was still worth it. I was in awe for days, weeks. It still goes through my mind as one of the most impressive things I've ever seen in nature. But it caused a lot of panic. In mid-August, South Carolina officials issued a warning of a potential spike in paranormal activity surrounding the August 21st total solar eclipse. And this message was in the form of a tweet by the South Carolina Emergency Management Division and included a map that showed possible lizard man sightings from 1980 to 2001 within the border of where the path of totality would be on the upcoming total eclipse. And it was kind of tongue-in-cheek, but a lot of people kind of flipped out about it, and it actually spawned a lot of other maps, including Bigfoot sighting maps in the other states from Oregon all the way down to, Virginia or the Carolinas? I forget where it ended. Then you had the crop circle or Death Star story. That was just silly. Started by the Secure Team 10 website, which is always uploads bogus or hoax videos. Then Nibiru, I don't know, however you want to pronounce it. A whole bunch of stories surrounding that came out. With David Mead saying it was would appear in the skies on September 23rd. Then this planet would crash into Earth, and that'd be it. We'd be done. So it would be all over by September 23rd. But we would have seen it coming. It's something that big in the sky. We'd have seen it during the day, let alone at night. You would have seen it coming. Yeah, I don't know. That whole story was nuts. Yep, the end of the world was supposed to be here, and the eclipse, the total eclipse. Everyone thought that stuff was going to happen. The Earth was going to come to a cataclysmic end. The blocking of the sun was going to be permanent. Dogs and cats would be playing together. I don't know. People just thought that stuff was going to happen. These things happen all over the place, all the time. This isn't an extremely rare event. Total eclipses happen all the time. We're just lucky that it was all the way across the United States. So a lot of people could see it all at the same time. Well, not at the same time, but you get it during the same day. And the Earth plunging into darkness. They thought that it was going to cause all kinds of problems. It never ended, and until the eclipse. Then it kind of quieted down a little bit. There was still the end of the Earth, the end of the world scenarios. Never happened, obviously. We're still here. At least I think we're still here. Then the number 7 story last year, one of my favorite topics, and we talked about it Sunday night on the Nightmare 365 podcast. Kind of mentioned it. We joked about it before the show, but flat earthers. Kyrie Irving got an assist with Shaquille O'Neal. The rapper I don't know how to say it. Is it B.O.B. or Bob? I don't know who this guy is. Also stepping forward, all these musicians and movie stars and different people, sports people. You're good at what you do. Well, most of you are. But keep the science for the people that know about science. Okay. Granted, a lot of that was supposed to be tongue in cheek, but it really influenced people, and we've had that. We mentioned it this year, a couple weeks ago, about the moon landing. So more misinterpretation of science happening even this year. Number 6 last year was the Chicago Phantom, which was heavily covered by Lon Strickler of Phantoms and Monsters, and it turned from a couple of sightings into basically this was just you're waiting every day for something. It started I think in April, I think, and it kept going. But then all of a sudden there was stories that were popping up from years ago or even earlier in the year. But it just kept going and going and going. But there was nothing really solid. Complete lack of verifiable evidence. Despite all these purported witnesses out here, there was supposedly a police report. Police officers supposedly saw this, and there was a police report. That police report did not exist. So it kind of casts some doubt. Each story kind of cast a little bit of doubt. So when you add all that up, just because you have 30 or 40 stories of something doesn't make it true. When you have 25 or 30 stories that don't add up, doesn't mean that it's not true. But when you start crossing these off the list, it makes that story a little bit harder to believe, but still was number 6 last year. Number 5 on my list of the top 10 paranormal news stories of 2017 was the thylacine. Yes, from Australia, the thylacine. There was some actual scientific work being done with this, as actual pieces of hair were accidentally discovered pretty much, and was disseminated. A man named Chris Rayberg was able to take photographs of this. Granted, nobody had really good photographs of what thylacine hair looked like. So in case we actually do stumble upon actual physical evidence of a living thylacine, we now have hair samples to compare it to, which is actually very, very important, just in case that thylacine is rediscovered. And if it is rediscovered, it will probably be the biggest animal discovery of the 21st century. And they say that the odds of that are extremely low. That was another story. There's literally 10 or 15 stories here on the thylacine. Really haven't heard much of that this year at all about the thylacine. Number 4 was the Amelia Earhart. So last year was the 80th anniversary of the disappearance of the airplane on an expedition of Amelia Earhart and her radio operator and the airplane. And there was several stories about this last year, as well as that History Channel show that all survived on a photograph that they thought was proof positive that she was kidnapped, but turned out to not be correct. And they just kind of dropped that like a hot rock right into the water. It disappeared faster than... never mind, I won't go there. But anyway, number 3 was the WOW signal. The WOW signal was a radio signal discovered back in 1977 in outside Columbus, Ohio, and it was thought to potentially be caused by aliens. Yes, could have been by aliens. They knew it was not a close object. A lot of times a satellite or something will create these very loud noises, but was not to be. And it went on in history as just this wow signal. We had no idea what it was. But Professor Antonio Paris stepped forward with his hypothesis and said that this was caused by, at the time we didn't know that there was these 2 comets in the area, and he felt that these comets were an explanation, that they were sending out signals that we just didn't, since we didn't know they were there, that this 1420 megahertz signal this emission was caused by that. So he did some work on that, and lo and behold, came out to say that the wow signal was caused by these comets. Now, a lot of scientists, even though they don't believe that this was a alien signal, still argue that this was not caused by that. Number two, scientists stated that ghosts do not exist. Yes, a scientist from the Large Hadron Collider said that basically, if ghosts exist, we had some sort of unknown energy, the Large Hadron Collider would have picked it up. We would have found it. And astrophysicist Neil deGrasse Tyson also was there at the time when this was said by Professor Brian Cox. And Neil Tyson says, if I understand what you just declared, you just asserted that CERN, the European Center for Nuclear Research, disproved the existence of ghosts. And Cox clarified the statement, says, yeah, if there was some sort of substance driving our bodies, making our arms and legs move, then it must interact with the particles out of which our bodies are made. And seeing as we've made high precision measurements of the ways that particles interact, then my assertion is there can be no such thing as an energy source that's driving our bodies. So that was, to me, was a big deal, but it really kind of passed under the radar. There was other studies that came out that were talking about this as well in different forms. So kind of lumped them all together. And I think it's pretty important that we look at that, we listen to that, and what these scientists are finding. That doesn't mean that ghosts don't exist. It just, at this point, what they're saying is that it may be not happening the way that we think it is. The number one story last year was exoplanets, the search for life in space. We had the TRAPPIST-1 story, which was a big deal, and a lot of other announcements that have happened. The Ross 128b, the Kepler 90I, so on and so forth. So many things that have happened. And I felt that was a big deal. Yes, it wasn't necessarily paranormal, but it was a big deal because, we're discovering planets at a record pace right now. And who knows, in the future, if we do find intelligent life out there, they may have come from one of these planets that we just discovered recently. We all knew about it. We may be long gone, but in the future, we may actually find meet intelligent life from a planet that we knew about was discovered. I think that's just awesome. And speaking of that, I have a new story real quick. I'll cover it before I hit the top three of this year. An object was discovered in our solar system. The most distant object ever discovered was recently discovered. And let me throw this in the chat room real quick. The link to the 2017 list, so you guys can check that out. It's really a link to the blog on paranewsinsider.com. You guys can check that out. And so this object is not very big. It's about 310 miles in diameter, give or take. Give or take. It's not like we measured it or anything, but it's pretty far away. It's about 120 astronomical units from the sun. That's far, folks. 120 astronomical units. So an astronomical unit is essentially the equivalent of it's basically the distance between the Earth and the sun, which, yeah, we've never been there. Like, I've never driven there, so I don't know. I haven't flown there. But it's 93 million miles. So 120 of these astronomical units. So 120 times 93 million. That's a lot. That's a lot of numbers. And Pluto, which, yes, Pluto is not a planet anymore. It's kind of a minor planet, but it doesn't get that cool status that it used to when we were growing up, or when I was growing up. Pluto was 34 astronomical units away. So previous to that was Eris, also a minor planet or a minor object, planetary object. Eris is 96 astronomical units from the sun. So a very distant object discovered. Pretty cool story, I think. Doesn't change anything for the top 10 in any way, shape, or form. But yeah, that's it. We're going to talk now about the, see if that works. There it is. That works, I think. I hope. Top 10 real quick, and then we're going to debut the top 3. So the top 10 this year, the top 10 paranormal news stories of 2018. Todd Standing with his trying to sue British Columbia, the state of California, about the existence of Bigfoot. I don't know why. It made the top 10. It was a very viral story in the media, an embarrassment to those of us in the paranormal as well as in the cryptid field. Number 9 was the strange creature wandering into the live shot in Utah. It turned out to be a dog. Number 8 was a wolf-like creature shot in Montana, which turned out to be a wolf. And number 7 was UFOs reported by pilots in 3 different occasions. The first one was early in the year in Arizona, 2 different pilots. We had the Ireland story just a couple of months ago, where 3 different pilots reported seeing a UFO. It turned out to be a meteor. Then in Baffin Bay, there's also a couple of pilots reported seeing an object. And as mentioned earlier, number 6 was the Loch Ness Monster. A number of stories kind of stapled together. Number 5, also mentioned earlier, was marrying a ghost. So a couple of stories all lumped in together from the United Kingdom, pretty much, of people falling in love with ghosts and getting married and hopefully having ghost babies, if that's possible. And the number 4 story here, Otago Loch Ness Monster DNA search. So scientists are actually studying the water of Loch Ness. I've gathered over 200 samples of the water from varying depths, looking at the animals, the creatures, the plant life, whatever's in there. I'm sure they're going to find like people samples too of skin and other things, just to find what's in there. Maybe they'll find evidence of the Loch Ness Monster, but maybe they won't. And how will that affect the Loch Ness Monster moving forward? So that's kind of a big story, I think, but not as big as our top 3, which are going to debut right now. I know the show should be ending. I got a little behind, but hang in there. Hang in there. You're going to want to hear these top 3. So number 3 was a kind of a big deal. But you probably don't remember it because it happened so early in the year. It was mayhem. It was madness. It was the Michigan meteor madness. So coming in at number 3 on this year's top 10 paranormal news stories, the Michigan meteor started back on January 16th at 8:08 p.m. Eastern Time. A meteor, which was probably only a yard or 2 in diameter, was seen streaking through the sky. No big deal. A bright flash and sonic boom were seen and felt afterward around the area right outside of Detroit. And the flash was seen not only in Michigan, but Ohio, Illinois, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Indiana. There was a little bit of confusion surrounding the event, as many thought the flash and boom were caused by a thunderstorm. But where was the rain? Some felt they felt the ground shake and thought, well, an earthquake just happened. It was actually reported that there was a 2.0 magnitude earthquake before they put everything together. And other people thought there was an explosion. And usually when this kind of thing happens, there is a little confusion. People were a little speculative as to what was going on. Some people got a little irrational about it. But not long after the initial confusion began to subside, and the fact of that this was potentially a meteor event, and the information was starting to kind of gain momentum in that direction, there was on social media a series of photographs that turned this simple event into a UFO invasion and government conspiracy theory within 20 minutes of this meteor basically crashing through our atmosphere. So a series of 3 photographs began to circulate of a light in the sky, as well as a fire occurring in Taylor, Michigan. Shortly after, a video showed up of this person walking around where this fire had destroyed this garage. Social media went into high alert. Rumors of an alien invasion, attack of a missile, people being blocked on Facebook for sharing this information, all the way up to a building being destroyed by a meteor, were flooding social media and confusing everyone And another part of the photographs that fueled speculation was the cold temperatures created what's known as light pillars. So the bright light of the fire created what looked like a streak of light going into the sky in two of these pictures. So it kind of gave the impression that a rocket had actually impacted the area. But the photograph, I mean, obviously so, the photograph would have had to have been taken at the right second. Probably no way that could have happened if a rocket was landing in the in there at that time. Let me throw that picture there in the chat room of that post. You can see the pictures that I'm talking about there. So there's the three pictures that created the chaos in Taylor, Michigan. And yeah, they were just, people were freaking out about this and saying that you're going to get banned from Facebook if you know this picture is going to go away, so you better share it now. You know, kind of one of those. And whenever I see that, I just kind of roll my ass. I don't think that's going to happen. But it was craziness. People were really, really confused by this. There, a lot of speculation. Officials went into quick kind of damage control here, and they let it be known that the fire was not caused by a meteor. It was caused by leaking fuel and oil from a vehicle that caused a garage fire in Taylor, Michigan. Totally unrelated, but unfortunately happened at the same time. People were confused. A lot of websites, even the next day, were proclaiming a UFO crash, UFO invasion, or at least a meteor strike that happened that hit this place and put it on fire. So it took about a week for the truth to circulate. And if that wasn't crazy enough, the next day it came out that a pastor had actually predicted the meteor striking the area. The prediction was actually made in a video, which I wouldn't have believed had I not seen it. It came out on December 31st, 2017. Pastor Rick Satterfield said, quote, "I had a dream that a meteor was coming to the Great Lakes and it was going to hit Michigan. It would cause Ohio and Canada to feel the impact of it." Well, unquote. Well, his prediction was not of a doomsday event, but one that would bring positive change to the region. Satterfield of the non-denominational Christian church named I Am Church has about 200 members. Again, I was highly skeptical, but I saw it. I heard it for myself. So interesting how that tied into that as well. Why the story made the top 10, the Michigan meteor might have faded away, but this was the hottest story of the year for a few months, and the sheer panic and confusion it created with UFOs and missile attacks rates this as one of the most viral stories of the year. So why was it only number 3? Well, other than the fact that there's 2 more stories that are bigger than this, the story had a logical solution, which was largely ignored the days since it was revealed and even confused those who lived in the area. Well, this was confusing and a far-reaching story. Again, it wasn't the most widely covered viral paranormal or strange story in the media. So that's number 3 this year, the Michigan meteor madness. So what's number 2? Well, you don't know what it is because you're not seeing it. Well, that's right. Number 2, well, yeah, it's not what you think. It's not what you think at all. Well, maybe what you think, but number 2, in my opinion, again, this whole top 10 thing is all how I see it, how different stories affected the paranormal. Different stories were carried virally in the paranormal as well. Number 2, in my opinion, goes to the Sunspot Observatory evacuation. And in what could be the strangest paranormal story, or maybe even conspiracy theory of the year, took place back on September 6th in Sunspot, New Mexico, the location of a strange scene where the Sunspot Solar Observatory, also known as the National Solar Observatory, was swarmed by FBI agents, Black Hawk helicopters, and it was completely evacuated. Local police officials had no idea what was going on, completely locked out of this, had no information about what was going on. Everybody jumped into conspiracy theory mode. People were talking about UFOs being seen in space, something happening, attacking us from space, like a Death Star was coming toward us. all sorts of weird things, from conspiracy theories to spies coming after us, people spying on the missile base, all sorts of stuff coming from this. But the biggest part was that the FBI was kind of refusing to tell the local sheriff what was happening. So it caused a lot of confusion, a lot of speculation, a lot of different things bouncing around about this, what this was. And it turned out to be a credible threat. And it took a few days for the story to kind of unfold, which was really, again, why this was so much speculation, because there wasn't a lack of information. And it took all the way up until September 16th for a statement to be read about this, and basically just said that there was a credible threat and that everything was going to be back to normal on September 17th, with really no major explanation. So just as the observatory went back online, the story again was national media, national news. People still didn't have the answer to this. And it took another couple of days for the truth to come out. And what had happened was, on Thursday, the FBI released documents, including a search warrant, that kind of put things in perspective. And to me, it was a little bit scarier than an alien invasion. So apparently, a janitor at the facility was suspected of downloading and distributing child pornography while using the Wi-Fi at the observatory. That's not the craziest part here. The laptop that contained the pornography was discovered by the chief observer at the observatory, and while later the janitor was seen leaving the office where the laptop had been discovered. The FBI was not behind the evacuation, but the Aura Consortium opted to get the workers out of the building due to statements made by the janitor. The statements released by the FBI states that the janitor was, quote, feverishly searching for the facility for the laptop, and made comments such as, quote, it was only a matter of time before the facility got hit, unquote, and that he, quote, believed there was a serial killer in the area, and that he was fearful that the killer might enter the facility and execute someone, unquote. So it turned out to be really, really weird. So why the story made the top 10, the evacuation and lingering story of the Sunspot Observatory sent everyone into conspiracy theory mode, including the mainstream media. They were in on it too. Was this UFOs, terrorism, spies, end of the world? No. The speculation of the story went beyond social media and paranormal bloggers into big media all over the world, and was definitely the strangest and biggest paranormal story of the year. Why the story was only number 2? Well, the story was probably the most viral story in a year that it lacked any heavyweight story, and probably could have landed at number 1. There just wasn't that big story this year that could have really knocked the story out. So really, truly, this was just left as one of the bigger stories of the year. But there is still that number 1 story. What was that number 1 story? Does anyone have a guess? Does anyone have a guess? Nobody knows. All right. Well, number 1 story of the year. Well, I haven't mentioned it. Haven't talked about it. But for this show here, a few changes that have happened during the year, and it just kind of, I don't know, just kind of an evolution for the show. And things happen with live radio when you're broadcasting a show. Different things come and go. So 10 years in September of this show. But back on February of this year, had the 350th episode. And then in April, left Radio Network I had been on for a couple of years, and took a little bit of a hiatus from April all the way to July 17th, where I joined the Paranormal King Radio Network. And the last show I did on that network was where this story broke, and it was a big deal for those of us in the paranormal when this story happened. And it's kind of, unfortunately, sadly, nobody really talks about it. But it's the kind of thing that we need to talk about, and we need to look back on. The number one story of the top 10 paranormal news stories Yes, it was mentioned. People asked about it. Was this story going to be in the top 10? And I didn't mention not covering the story. But some of the stories that didn't make it, which I mentioned with the cryptid stuff with Bigfoot erotica, Ogopogo, finding Bigfoot, the tree kangaroo. What else didn't make it? Alligator sightings, one of my favorite stories of the year. A number of alligator sightings up here in the north, Chicago with one. Or no, was it Detroit? Might have been Detroit. I don't remember. North Dakota had a alligator sighting. Really weird. Psychic scammers, people scamming people for money was a couple of stories. Ghost hunting device caused a bomb scare earlier this year. North Carolina UFO video turned out to be the Goodyear blimp. That didn't even make the top 10. One of my favorite stories overall was the woman who had the telepathy thing that chased a mountain lion out of her house. That was hilarious. Didn't make the top 10 at all. The Thailand clarinet wielding trolls, remember those guys a couple weeks ago? Didn't make the top 10. Mind reading devices that put us on the edge of reality. Really wanted that to make it because this is kind of bordering on mind reading, ESP. Didn't even make the top 10. Skydivers thought to be UFOs. 5 different stories throughout the year. I got tired of talking about it, but it didn't even make the top 10. So yes, the one story I did not mention was a pretty big story earlier in the year. And, I mentioned it with Lauren Coleman about people passing away. We've lost a lot of people this year, unfortunately. Cryptozoology with John Bindernagel. But we also lost Crop Circle, Doug Bauer, part of the Doug and Dave Crop Circle phenomena. Look them up. Doug and Dave were right there in the heart of all the Crop Circle phenomena happening. Of course, we lost Stephen Hawking this year, which Stephen Hawking had been in the paranormal news a lot, especially for warning us about not getting involved in talking to aliens. Michael Persinger also passing away, which is a big deal for the ghost people, as well as Brad Steiger also passing away. And we also had, again, finding Bigfoot that went away. The Kepler Space Telescope died as well. It's a machine, but it was kind of instrumental, no pun intended, about finding these exoplanets. Very big deal. But the number one story overall is probably the biggest loss of all of us in the paranormal. We all felt this, no matter what you're into. If you're into UFOs, you're into conspiracy theories, you're into ghosts, you're into cryptozoology, we all felt it. And yes, that happened way back on Friday, April 13th, the death of Art Bell. It sent a ripple throughout the paranormal late Friday night, and everybody was talking about it. Everybody changed their formats of their radio shows here in the paranormal. It was a big deal, and everybody kind of knew that Art had health problems, but it still came as a shock that he passed away. He'd made a number of comebacks to the radio. He was on Sirius XM back in 2013 for a few months, came back to terrestrial radio in 2015 for a few months. Then he finally called it quits. He was fearful for his life. There was trespassers on his property, gunshots fired. But yes, Art Bell died on Friday, April 13th. And his death was actually announced by the Nye County Sheriff's Department in Nevada. And a lot of people were confused by this. They were suspected something was wrong about this. There was a lot of conspiracy theory talk. People were angry at the Nye County Sheriff's Department. And then probably one of the hardest things I've ever listened to on the radio was when George Norrie, the host of Coast to Coast that night, revealed publicly that Bell had died. It was very hard. It's still hard to I listened to it a couple of days ago. It was hard to get through that. Art, he was a radio show host, but I'll tell you what, he was the center of the culture of belief for a very, very long time. And he really affected a lot of people in the paranormal one way or the other. And he We can talk about TV shows, we can talk about the internet, we can talk about all these things that made paranormal popular. But I tell you what, none of it means anything without Art Bell on the radio with Coast to Coast and influencing so many people. So the passing of Art Bell was a shock to many, despite his health woes in the last few years. The amount of tributes and recognition for his barrier-breaking moments, especially with, he made the paranormal mainstream. He really did, long before TV shows. And the media, really covered this very well when he passed away. Everybody was talking about it, and everybody was talking about it in a good way. It wasn't putting him down. It wasn't bashing him for his beliefs. It was actually kind of a proud moment, despite the sadness that lingered throughout. And it was amazing to see movie stars, musicians, all sorts of famous people stepping forward and telling an Art Bell story. So it was pretty cool to see that tribute after his passing. So why was this story number one? Well, this was definitely the number one story, how it affected nearly everyone involved in the paranormal, or anyone who have ever heard or listened to Coast, hosted by Art Bell. And again, it's never been the same. No matter who hosts that show, it's just never sounds the same. And I'm not just talking about the voice, talking about what's behind that voice. And with that, that is our top 10 paranormal news stories. And that's it. That's it for me for the year. Sorry I went over a little bit, but I had to get all this stuff in. A lot of information. But I want to let you know, yes, we'll not be back next week or the week after. Next week, in case you didn't know, check your calendar. It's Christmas. So have a Merry Christmas. And the week after that is New Year. Happy New Year as well. So have a safe and very happy New Year as well. I look forward to seeing you guys all next year with new stories. But until then, as always, I'll see you, well, not next week. I'll see you January 8th. But for now, keep your eyes in the skies, your ears in the woods, the hair standing on the back of your neck, and always keep your mind slightly ajar. And above all else, don't stop believing. For the Paranormal News Insider, this is Dr. Brian D. Parsons, signing off for 2018.